Vaults of Varn is a setting book written and designed by Leo Hunt and illustrated, I should say, by Leo Hunt, who was kind enough to send me this copy of the deluxe edition. And it is described as a sky blue desert littered with the ruins of a far future. It is a place where the sun is dying and the wreckage of other worlds are in this wasteland, and it can be thought of as like a blue ruin. And Varn is a science fantasy tabletop RPG setting, and it is inspired by and based on Knave by Ben Milton, and the rules and the stats are based on Knave. I'm not going to go into those rules and stats in this video. This video is going to show you and talk about the incredible random table resources that are in this volume and how you can use them to create stories for yourself and to work with the overall setting of Varn to place characters into a story and interact with this world in a very three-dimensional way. And the actual mechanics of the game I'm not going to get into. So the first thing I want to do is to really focus on the third section here on generating your own setting. And as I've talked about in my videos and in my solo Game Master's Guide, that is particularly for soloists, starting with an environment and then putting your characters into it is a much more effective way of getting going into a session with something new than just building a character and having a character with nowhere to put it. So with that, we're going to start to look at the regions of Varn and how we can create our own world within those regions. All right, I've got my Vaults of Varn, I've got my coffee, I have my D20s, my paper, my pencil. I'm going to make a world, and that's going to be the starting point, the starting place for everything we're going to end up doing here in this game. So I'm going to roll these and just kind of move them over to orient them. Again, this is going to be abstracted in so many ways. So the distance itself or the location, we'll just do this for the purposes of the video. And we've got our values here. Happily, they're all different values. And we're simply going to note them down. And then we're going to go to the reference sheet and figure out what we have in this world, where it is, and start to build out aspects of the location as the beginning, as the anchor point, as I said, for what we're doing, and ultimately even who we're going to play, perhaps, and what we're going to be having them doing, because we are using this, as I said, as a source book for a place into which we're going to put our character actors, which will then determine how we have a story. So going from left to right here, we're starting out with some type of landmark here, and the landscape, if we want to use it, is a fungal forest, and it's named for a long dead settlement. So let's start here, and I may do some of this off camera for time reasons, but I really want to show you the complexity and variety of what is offered. So we know in general it is going to be some type of landmark, and we will go to the landmark section and find another D20 table here, and it is, well, I suppose we could decide, we could even go random. Is it natural or is it artificial? If it's natural, it's a tall rock with an eye-like hole, or with the same value, it's an indestructible chrome tower without windows or doors. And I think for my feeling of this, I don't know, I like the concept of a chrome tower somehow. So we will mark that as a chrome tower, and then we'll move across and see what we got next, which is a grave. And a grave options are Varn is, above all else, heavy, a land heavy with endings, and tombs punctuate the desolation with grim regularity. So we have here, basically, we're going to roll 4d20s and get our values to read across there. And we'll just do this. And the grave is it's located on a lonely hilltop, and it is a grave for a powerful psychic. And the burial method was held in a preservation tank, and the grave quirk is that it has been desecrated. So, like right there, if we wanted to, this could be the beginning of a story, of a focal point. And I did opt because I made the decision to go with the artificial construct here, and this grave that we are describing here is clearly some type of artificial construct, because it is described as this psychic is held in a preservation tank, but it has been desecrated. So who desecrated it and why perhaps is giving us some backstory already as to something has happened to disturb the preservation of this powerful psychic. And perhaps the backstory to our adventure is a conflict about mysticism or magic or the psychic powers that this person had. So those are questions that I'm beginning to ask myself about the world and maybe what happened before we got here, because the quirk of the grave is that it has been desecrated. So something in the past is significant as to why. So that's like a story seed for us. Moving further across our landscape here, we have a cackle maw den. So that is on page 73. And let's see what that is. It is described, the dens of the cacklemaw are not difficult to locate. One must simply follow the sound of uproarious merriment, all weapons being discharged wildly, of discordant and rowdy music played last and poorly, and of vehicles being driven in circles with no apparent destination. So this is, we have this kind of creepy illustration here of this big clown face. I don't know if these are described in the bestiary. Let's see. They are a biological entity. Here, I guess that's one of them. They're lurking, laughing hyena women. Maybe that's one. No, I see. That's the Cacklemaw War Mama. Okay. They fight in packs with little regard for their own safety, will snap at opponents' faces in close quarters with their powerful teeth. A group of 8 or more will always include a war mama. So here we have them. The war mamas are the largest, meanest, and most cunning in the pack, of course. They lead from the front and must be seen to savor the violence, lest they be challenged by one of their underlings. For this reason, war mamas will never retreat from combat if other Cacklemaw are there to witness it. So we have here this Cacklemaw den down here in the center of our map, and let's see what they are. We also have some 4d20 we can roll up to get something, and they are sworn to their mama yawning foot, and their weapons that they have are exploding javelins, and what they're doing right now is they're rustling livestock, and they want some drugs. So we have this perhaps as a secondary thing. I don't know. Maybe we would visit them and get one of them to join us. They seem a little merry to do something that has to do with what feels like a serious errand to figure out who desecrated this tomb, but who knows? So we have this here, and we'll continue on. By choosing to roll up initially 5 different locations, I'm building in already options for myself to take a story in a certain direction and highlight, what I want to be significant. And clearly the tone and feeling of this Cacklemaw den here is very different than the desecrated grave. All right, let's continue to move on here at 17. And the trading post has 3 different choices here. And it is located at a stone fort. And it is, who trades here? Oh, the Cacklemaw exiles trade here. Okay. So this is giving us some relation right away. And what is traded is weapons. So that is something, if we were to develop doing something with this Kakama outpost here, and there's a trading post with weapons in this stone fort. So there's something that could be going on there. And let's see, maybe our last location will give us a direction. It is going to be a settlement. So for settlement is interesting because we've got a double page spread here, and it's kind of built into the concept of a conflict. So the whole philosophy behind rolling up a settlement is one of conflict between a couple of NPCs, and then you get the physical aspects like what the local industry is, the houses, a notable structure, and the government. I think for my purposes here, what is going to be most significant is, first of all, the local industry, like what the settlement is about. If we're looking to this settlement to describe something in the rest of the world. But so what we're going to do is we're going to roll 4 dice, but they're going to be for these first 3 columns and then the local industry. That's what I'm interested in most initially, and the rest is more dressing to me. But let's see what we get here. So the structure of the conflict is going to be unrequited love. Now, I say this often, but this is a perfect example of it. If you roll up something that you don't like, just ignore it and move on. I'm not interested in a settlement philosophy or building on a story about unrequited love. It just doesn't interest me. So I'm going to re-roll this, and I got a 16 instead. Okay, we have addiction here. That's a little bit more interesting to me because I believe somewhere, and I can't remember where, we rolled up something to do with drugs, I think. So that is, I'm going to have to go back and reflect on this in editing and connect that, but I'm going to stick more with that. The first NPC, the conflict is, there's some conflict about addiction or drugs, and this is from the spouse of the governing figure and a hermit who lives outside the settlement. So there's some connection between the spouse of the governing figure and the hermit and there's like this addiction idea. We have this trading in weapons here. Perhaps there is something to do with this spouse trying to gain some illicit, well, it said drugs, maybe it's illicit weapons from the trading post. I'm not sure, but that's a possibility. And then the last one that I rolled up was the local industry of this settlement is mining. So it is a mining industry, and they are mining glowstone. So you can see, based on this, what we've rolled up here, a number of different story themes could emerge, because we have the concept here that in this settlement there is a conflict about something concerning addiction, and also these cackle that live in this den here are also desirous of some form of drug. So perhaps they are exiled from this settlement and they are sworn to this Mama Yawning Foot, and maybe she was kicked out of the settlement in some way. So you could develop the settlement in that manner, and you could perhaps play a party of people who are trying to get her the drugs if you centered on this as the starting point for your story. For example, another way to go is the trading post here that we talked about. The Kakama exiles are trading here. Now they're trading weapons. Perhaps they are in the midst of trading weapons or accruing some arsenal to attack the settlement to get the drugs. So this kind of configuration in the regions that you've created in the little world here already is in relation to one another narratively, and you could develop your own session and make characters to fit into some kind of story like that, or to interact with or develop some kind of story like that. The first set of things that we talked about earlier on was kind of in a different direction, where we had the Chrome Tower, and it is a landmark of some sort, and then we rolled up the grave that was for this powerful psychic that has been desecrated. So I was starting to think, well, there could be some kind of story here. What is the connection between these things? Maybe nothing. I don't know. We don't know. There's no distances that we've rolled up here. This is just putting regions together. They could be very far apart and have nothing to do with one another, or they could be connected in some way, and that's something that you could build out. There are travel rules here. We're not going to really get into the rules per se, but there are travel rules here for figuring out what will happen along the way if you're traveling. Now, there's also, I wanted to point out and show you how this weather system works. There's a really basic but clever weather system here, where you will start in a blank hex here. You'll roll a d6, and based on that value, in this case it's a 2, 1, 2, this is bringing you to something that is a still weather system. And then you could continue rolling, whether it's the next day or the next hour, and you go 1, 2, 3, and then there is a sandstorm. And the impact and the description of what that will mean is given here in the next page. So a sandstorm says a howling wind blows a ferocious cloud of azure sand across the desert. Nobody travels in sandstorms. The PCs must hunker down and wait out the storm. Tents or other makeshift shelters will provide adequate protection. Any encounters rolled during these days are assumed to be seeking shelter from the storm in the same place as the party. So it will give you not just weather, but it will give you some suggestions of what that could mean in terms of the narrative impact of something. And then if you were here in the sandstorm and you continued on rolling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the next day would be clear, and so on. And the options are, we won't go through all of them, but there could be a heat wave, for example, and it gives the impact here that the PCs must consume twice their normal ration of water per day if they're traveling during this. There could be worm pollens. So sandworms reproduce through a Baroque decade-long process of parthenogenesis, and it has deluge of their pollen and what that means in terms of your travel. And you can eat the edible pollen, and you treat the worm pollen days as providing D4 rations per player. So it is a further way to flesh out your story. And I see here, I was doing the counting wrong because there is a key up here, and actually the 1 value is here. It is not at the actual north. It is in this side of the hex. So in any event, I suppose as long as you're consistent, it doesn't really matter. So that is the weather random table. And who is living in your world? Well, you are going to be given choices for character creation that have different backgrounds, ancestries along with them, and we'll take a look at a few of them here. So the true kin, and we could see the layout here with all the random tables are given. We have the special rules for them. So the true kin, they sealed themselves inside hidden archaeologies when the Great Collapse came, and in this fashion they preserved their bodies from the degradations that afflicted those left living upon the surface. So there's lots of mutants in this world, as we'll see, but the true kin are maybe the closest toward the original humans as they were. The synths are in service of mankind, and they are lots of different breeds of them. They're sort of metal and plastic. They don't need to eat or breathe, and they have a synthetic mind. They're vulnerable to attacks that target the powers them. And there is part of the table is rolling up what is your power source, what you were made for to do, and what you realized that, so it's kind of this hybrid state that you're in. And then, of course, the size, the form it takes could be humanoid, a mantis, a priest, the type of head you have. So it's kind of cobbled together. You could have a missing head or a plant-like head, what your limbs are like, and what your finish is like, chameleon, or perhaps your purple or umber. New beasts or humanoid animals produced through intensive nanotech enhancements and bioengineering, and we have a special rule associated with them, and again, the kind of amalgam of patch together what you could be, a new badger with a new hippo, a new raven, and a new lynx as part of your patchwork together, and what your hue is, what the mask that you're wearing is, or what the character type you're inhabiting, like a scholar or a sage, and some oddity about you, like you have synthetic eyes or a missing limb, or perhaps a human child as a pet. So you get the weird world sense here, and this is my favorite one. I think you can play as a fungus, a micromorph, and they are formed of cadaverous flesh and voracious fungus, and they name their kind the twice born because they are formed from fungus and the corpse of a human. And so it gives you tables for what the body is like, the head, the color, the texture. You could be downy, or you could be made of tree bark, or perhaps fuzzy or velvety. We have names, your demeanor, some other quality that you have, like you might have poisonous spores or an aphrodisiac flesh, and what the corpse you were born from was. And again, scholar, mystic, priest, beggar, courtesan. This could be put together to create a backstory and extrapolate from that a backstory for your character. Moving on, these are the mutation tables. There's a D100 mutation table that you would roll on to see how your body has evolved over time. Mystic gifts are basically like sort of the source of inner power, and there's essentially spark tables here to roll on to see the impact of this. So you could have detonating wind or countering stone, and out of that describe what your mystic gift or your spell-like power would be. In this game, there are Exotica, and these are rare objects that the PCs begin with as well as look for during the course of the game. So let's see, it's a D20 here, so we'll roll up one random one to give a sense of what they are. And we got a nightmare box that is described as a grim flower that sprouts from the forehead of corpses, sometimes kept as a keepsake of a lost companion. So you could see again how that could work into the backstory of your character, or perhaps that becomes part of a goal of the story that you are doing. We took a brief look already at the bestiary. You can see some of the really cool art here, and because this book is written and illustrated by the same person, Leo Hunt, it has a very consistent feel to it, and that serves along with the sort of monochromatic blue presentation to really bring you into this world. Super helpful is a random table numbered for the 20 creatures in the bestiary, and if you want to get a random encounter with them, you could just roll on that table. And here is a lengthy D100 table of Exotica. So you can roll on these things to, let's roll up a couple and see what. So we rolled up a 50. A watchful ferret, a small golden synthetic ferret that sits on your shoulder, nips you if it detects an unseen danger. That's pretty cool. I'd like that. And let's see. And of course, you could use these for any game. This is a cool trinkety table. A magnetic orb, a large silver orb which emits powerful magnetic field, turn on and off at will. And I suppose you could decide what that magnetic field did for you. And we'll just look at one more here. An entropy gun causes rapid decay of organic matter. Ooh, I like that. So this is a great table to bring into. You could bring this into many games. Obviously, it's sort of system neutral in terms of stats there. Now I want to take a look at the NPC creation options here. So you can create really fleshed out NPCs with all the different types of ancestries. You have options for gender, the body type, what they want to do, and this would be something that would be very important. So narratively speaking, so this NPC, whichever one it would be fleeing the law. So if you, for example, go back to this table here or this region that you're starting to create and say, I'm going to put some NPCs in here and see where that takes me in terms of story development. And we just rolled up somebody is fleeing the law. Perhaps if you were in your settlement and you decided that they were fleeing the law, maybe they're fleeing to this den, and it goes along with the concept of this drugs or something that is craved in this desert world. Maybe it's some water derivative, or maybe I would think of it as like an enhanced water or something. And you have an NPC that's fleeing the law. Perhaps they could come and they could help you in whatever you were trying to do, or perhaps they are coming there to warn you or something about that. And more details, specific details like their voice and their attire. Their attire actually also could be, this looks like, I'll say a D12. Their attire also could be extrapolated to become sort of a narrative thing. So if they were wearing colorful attire, maybe they were escaping from the governors or the royalty of this settlement. And back to our own notes here, we remember that some of the conflict had to do with the spouse of the governing figure. So perhaps if this person who was fleeing the law in this colorful attire, maybe it is an associate of the spouse of the governing figure who's escaped and seeking to help or something like that. Oh, I see. It was a D20 table. Well, in any case, I rolled a D12. You get the point. We have specific tables that will show us what they want to do. So we could say, for example, we'll take some D20s and give an example here. So if you wanted a little more structure for who, what, and why, we would have a pedantic heretic who wants to abduct a bandit king. And the added complication is that there is a pack beast stampede happening. Now, that's a whole story that you could bring into your world. And let's see, another one. We have a tiny Cacogin, and they are wanting to collect a debt from a synth surgeon. And the complication is going to be that there is a murderous clone on the loose. So that is, for me, that would be a lot to bring into a story that I was developing. But it is a lot in and of itself. I mean, to me, that might just be an entire story. And I would go from there as opposed to sort of rolling that up into something I was doing. But you can see lots of options here. There's a D100 table for what you find in the sand, because we are in this desert world and we're traveling. It's a lot of this is overland based. So you could say, as I'm building out my regions here, well, what is lying here between the Cacogin den and the gravesite, for example, and what did we roll up? What's there? It's a set of lockpicks. Well, maybe somebody was attempting to break into this grave, or that's the lockpicks were used to desecrate that grave, and you could find that as as evidence of what was happening. Or there's a tinderbox here. So lots of things to find in the sand. And we have the rolling up list of petty gods. So it says Varn is the graveyard of faiths, some older than the very stars that shine overhead. And you can roll up if you're interested in having this type of kind of meta godlike system in your world, you could have the divine aspect, the secondary iconography, the holy domain, the sacred color, and what they're honored through. This is not something I typically do in my games, but it is here with random tables if you want it. We mentioned drugs and addiction in our world, so we could roll up and see. Let's see what that might be if we're going to go with that theme for our story. And we will have, let's see, it's an azure is the hue of our drug, which maybe means it comes from the blue sand. Oh, it takes the form of honey. So there's a blue honey drug, and it is ingested by being absorbed in the skin. And what the effect is, it leaves you paralyzed. So that could be the thing that these Kagagens are addicted to, although the paralysis doesn't really go with the description of them as being quite energetic. But be that as it may, I like the concept of the blue honey in any case. And there's a whole table here to create different types of books that have been written and who they've been written by and what they've been written about, or a notable feature of the book. So you could find a book that's about the future with an unknown language, or it is a clever forgery. And then finally we get to the vaults, the title of this book, The Vaults of Varn. These are subterranean ruins that riddle the blue desert. Essentially they're like dungeon features. They will always contain Exotica, which are the far future treasures that the PCs are searching for. And we have tables again for them. So we'll roll up a vault and see as an example of what we might have. So the entrance to this vault is below a ruin, and then we can go back to the tables we looked at earlier. We didn't get to ruins, but within that you can then see what the ruin was and what it is now, what it appears like, and any other features it has. So in this particular case here, you're given even more detail. Not everything here refers back, but the ruin one does. So this would be a vault that's below a ruin, and the tunnels are surprisingly clean, and its original function was a military command post, and the first room feature is there's some preserved foodstuffs in the first room that we see here. And we could roll up then another room feature. And the second room feature would be, there's a warning in an ancient language, and the hazard in this vault is, it's the lair for a monster. And then we could go to page 79 and see what the lair actually would be, what the monsters would be, what it looks like, and perhaps there's an omen there. So again, in this case, we rolled up something that had tables within tables. You wouldn't necessarily always get that, but you could use that if you were wanting to do just a dungeon crawl portion of the world. And then the book finishes up with a fully rendered city, Nomen, and it is mapped, it is described. We're not going to get into that here, but you have different districts and quarters. You could play within that. There are factions that live in this city, and lots of information. You could just put yourself right into that, or I love this guy, pull out of this something to make an NPC for your own world and your own story. And then the factions that are here are also given some random tables that you could use to roll on and develop these into your own story if you wanted to do that. And as if that isn't enough, there's even more, where we have the some tables on just miscellany, some more NPCs than what they want to do, what they used to be doing, and structures in this world and what a notable feature of them are. So you could pull these out, these buildings, and if you were making in your settlement, perhaps if your settlement was big enough to have significant structures, you could go to these tables and roll them up. So that is a look at the deluxe edition of Vaults of Varn. There are still some things I didn't quite get to. There's a specific adventure with adventure locations that I didn't get into detail, but I think hopefully I've given enough for you to see the really rich amount of random tables that are here and a world that is unto itself something unique. And in this one edition of the material, offering so much depth and so many starting points for adventures that are region-based, land-based, environmental-based, living in this world of Varn.